Game changers, game changers. Welcome to At the Desk with Dr. KwA, where leadership, scholarship, and lived experiences intersect. As I always say, this is the podcast where transformation begins with conversation. Today's episode is rooted not only in personal narrative, but in ongoing doctoral research. What happens when Black women who once loved mathematics grow to dislike it because of classroom messaging, teacher expectations, and systemic positioning, and then later reclaim that love through healing, scholarship, and liberatory practice? Joining me today is Miss Stephenie Tidwell, a mathematics supervisor, former finance professional, adjunct professor, and doctoral candidate whose current research centers on Black women's math pedagogies and liberatory practice. Miss Stephenie Tidwell, welcome to the desk.
Good afternoon. Glad to be here with you, Dr. Kwa. Been a minute, but glad to see you.
Yes, absolutely. It's been a minute. It's been a minute. And so when I ran into you a few months ago, you told me you were back in school doing the doctorate thing. So I'm
Mhm.
curious. I was curious about what your research was on. And you talked about the fact that you were focused on Black women teachers and their lived experiences with
Mhm.
mathematics. So specifically, your research specifically examines the lived experiences of Black women who once loved math, somewhat disengaged, and have now returned and are practitioners themselves. What prompted you to center your population in your scholarship?
So, when you're doing qualitative research, a lot of what you focus on is somewhat of a story of your own. Um, so, it basically centers on the fact that I wasn't even an educator
Hmm.
over 20 some odd years ago, and I was working actually in banking and finance at that time, and I
Okay.
had an employee that I spoke to her one day. We were working in the mortgage department, and she was the mortgage processor, and I said something to the effect of, make sure you lock in Miss so and so's rate at 7.25%.
Mm-hmm.
And went back later in the day because rates constantly move throughout the day. Went back later in the day, we were having a conversation about something, and I said, "Oh, by the way, did Miss So and So get 7.25% or something better?" And she said, "Ho ho ho, wait, you just changed the numbers on me." And it proceeded with a conversation of 7.25 bankers lingo and
mm.
7.25 are
Hmm.
the same numbers. And
Mm.
basically, it went from the conversation to me pulling quarters out of my pocketbook later in the afternoon and holding several weeks of math lessons with her. And I say that because this was
Wow.
a young black um, woman
Okay.
who her profession required her to be able to manipulate numbers if she was
Mm-hmm.
going to stay in that department, because she was responsible for doing all of the mortgage processing and be able to identify what this particular payment's going to be based on the rate, whether this rate will be better, whether you should pay
Right.
points. So those are the
Mm-hmm.
things that people would be coming to her for.
Right.
So, I sat back and I said to myself, like, what happened that here she is 20 some odd years old,
Mm.
and she can't engage with mathematics the way she needs to, but it's a requirement of her job.
Wow.
And so her response to me after that was, if I'd had teachers like you, math teachers like you when I was in school, I might like math today. And then she questioned why I
Wow.
was still working in
Wow.
banking and not teaching. So a year later, not even a year later, actually 9/11, I watched one of the planes fly into the building while I was watching the news,
Mm-hmm.
fly into the World Trade Center, and that I sat down that day and wrote out what I wanted to do with my life. And
Hmm.
months later, I was in an alternate route program becoming a math teacher.
Wow. Wow. But that's a powerful statement, right? If I had math teachers like you, I would have loved math. Like,
Yeah.
what was the messaging, right? So when we talk about these things, so this research that you're doing, I gather is grounded in data, narrative inquiry, and lived testimony. So you
Mhm.
talk to me a little bit about your subjects and some of the testimonial elements that you're finding.
So how I frame let me talk about first about how I frame this study, right? Because
Okay.
wanting to study lived experience and how it shows up in the classroom and in your pedagogy had to do with the fact that um, understanding where I actually come from, having had parents who grew up during Jim Crow segregation,
Mm-hmm.
and you're talking about unequal times, the positioning of Black people as lazy, ignorant, dumb, and stupid, but yet
The
I had a
narrative.
father. Yes, but yet I had a father who was an engineer
Mm.
and actually worked 40 some odd years, ended his career working for the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, where he basically ran a region of the department that stretched all the way down to Puerto Rico,
Wow.
right? So I'm
Wow.
saying to myself, okay, how is it and why is it that today these patricias exist and we act like we can't teach kids of color
Hmm.
mathematics specifically? We're
Right.
positioning them a certain way, but yet in the most inopportune times, we see so many people of color, Black folks specifically, during segregation, and in that era of the 50s, 60s, 70s,
Right.
who were not only bright, but they were at the top of their game. So that kind of became the question, like what is it about today? So I
Mm.
went through this whole process of looking at the history of Black folks in education all the way back to enslavement,
Okay.
uh, realizing what Black women brought with them from Africa and the things that they did, focusing on the fact that literacy
Hmm.
was identified as freedom, yet
Right.
not being able to be literate or to get an education, we used ancestral ways, storytelling, oral histories,
The
things of
oral
that nature.
tradition. Hmm.
Yes. And so while the focus was on I'm willing to die to learn how to read,
Right.
we created these spaces for people to still exist and feel free and be free through the
Mm-hmm.
processes of having our little camp meetings, where we
Right.
steal away to tell our stories, steal away to do certain things. So, through this concept of looking at historicizing Black women, looking at development of individuals, that is Brofenbrenner's ecological system, where it states that there are numerous systems that impact the individual and make the individual who they are. You got a microsystem, which
Facts.
is your family, your meso, your exo, to your macro system,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And I said, and so if you look at his philosophy, he says, in a person's normal lifetime. So I said, wait, we have to look at how can that include Black folks because we didn't have a normal lifetime, right? So therefore, through using Black feminist thought, Brofenbrenner, and historicizing, I came up with the Black woman's ecosystem. And so
Okay.
I started looking at my participants. The other thing I did was I went back to the tradition because if you look at the history of Black folks in research and
Mm-hmm.
studying their pedagogy, Black women, Blacks in math, Black period,
Right.
uh, what you see is very little about Black women. What you will see is a lot about the positioning of Black students. We're always focusing on the fact that they don't compare to others, right?
Mm.
They're not performing.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and absent from that is what we actually are and can do. So my focus was on providing Black women the opportunity to tell their stories and for me to research their stories to find out where that's showing up in their pedagogy.
Okay.
So, through storytelling, because I basically just sat and listened and recorded their stories,
Right.
and then I analyzed their stories to find out, okay, what's really happening here with these particular folks. And
Mm-hmm.
no, we're not talking about folks who basically grew up during segregation. We're talking about folks who are in their 30s,
Okay.
40s, but yet the experiences that they had in math classrooms, it
Hmm.
may have been during segregated times.
Wow.
Um,
Wow.
and I say that to say I had many of them had families who migrated north but were from the
Hmm.
South. So they brought with them a lot of Southern tradition. So you
Okay.
hear the women talking about those Southern traditions in their stories, um, and the expectations of their families around what it means to be educated.
Hmm.
Um, Two of the participants were first generation
Okay. Okay.
students,
Okay.
and they talked about their parents not being able to go or finish college because they were helping out the family, but what they said about the importance of them getting an education.
Mm.
And one of the participants comes from a very long line of folks who were teachers and things of that nature. She didn't want anything to do with education, but she still found herself years later, after having a career in corporate America, coming into the field of education in STEM because she majored in a STEM field and never worked in it.
Wow. So that's
Right?
that's fascinating. So let me jump in here because I'm even though we know the narrative around us,
Hmm.
right? How we can measure up and how we don't measure up, the narrative. And
Hmm.
then now you're digging a little deeper into a sector of our folks, right? Black women specifically, and then the dynamics associated with just if us in total couldn't live up to or step up or measure up to anybody else, right? Black women were even further down on the list. And what I want to kind of pull out of you is based on the narrative that you heard from these women. What kind of messages or messages were emerging from their narrative that you think they received during their K-12 experience?
Yeah. So um, I think the messaging that they received specifically was uh, a positioning that existed for anybody, not just them as individuals, but
Mm-hmm.
it was the system that they were in. And if we think about the system of education, especially after desegregation, Brown versus the Board of Ed, and
Right.
the dismantling of the Black educational system, where you had, if you read Siddle Walker or James Anderson, you have these almost cocoons
Mm.
of protection, but at the same time, almost like covert pedagogy, where
Okay.
yeah, if somebody walks into my classroom, we're studying this, okay? But when they're not here, this is
Ye-
what we're talking about, and this is how I'm teaching it to you, right? So
right.
it's this matter of building you up, that you are capable, you
Mm.
are smart, you are this. Love to focus on and talk about my first participant because she made a statement during our conversation that
Mm-hmm.
she basically, and I called what she did sort of like a silent resistance.
Mm.
She loved mathematics up until middle school and found a teacher, or at least ended up in a classroom with a teacher who she found was unhelpful for
Hmm.
her. Right. And she basically stated that she uh, just became silent. So she didn't
Wow.
talk,
Wow.
she didn't participate, uh, and she basically said that in that classroom, she did not feel like a person. So
That is
when
so
you talk,
fascinating. But
yes.
how I'm that's fascinating because the question then, based on just that disposition and that statement,
Mhm.
how many scholars have come through the classroom with teachers that are well intended and well meaning, but have felt that they weren't being given the support, and the opportunity to thrive in
Right.
that environment. So therefore, they got
Right.
silence.
So I look forward to continuing this research because I want to find more people and I want to expand the study.
Okay.
Uh, but here's what I will say: out of 5 participants, let me also clarify that um, this particular participant grew up in a predominantly suburban school district where she was one of few.
Okay.
Okay. Now, just because she grew up in a suburban school district, I'm going to tell you that all 5 of my participants experienced some form of positioning them as incapable.
Wow.
All 5 of them. Okay.
Regardless,
Uh,
regardless of where they went to school.
that is correct. That is correct. Um, two,
That th-
three, three ended up in remedial courses, even in
mm,
college, from
wow.
high school to college. Even the person I was just speaking of,
Mm-hmm.
um, one one particular participant who was gifted and knew she was gifted as early as second grade. She was telling
Mm,
the teacher, I don't need to use manipulatives. I know 2 plus 2 is 4. I know 2 plus 3 is
right,
5.
right,
I don't want to
right.
use that, right? She grew up in an urban area initially where her two teachers, Black teachers, saw
Mm,
her gift and encouraged her at 5th grade that she should apply for the gifted and talented school. And she did. They made sure she did all the paperwork. They made
mm-hmm.
sure her family did the application and everything. So she got accepted to gifted and talented. She
Right.
stayed in gifted and talented and finished algebra 1 by 8th grade. Her
Okay.
parents then, for better education, chose to move to the suburbs.
Mm,
When they moved to the suburbs, she got her schedule and realized that she had been put in a general basic skills math class, even though her
wow.
transcript said Algebra 1.
Wow.
Her
Wow.
response, her statement, because she remembers this. She says, I just remember them saying something like, oh, it was that school. That school's not really gifted.
Wow.
And
Wow.
she said, I don't know what they did to determine that other than the fact that it was predominantly Black.
But that's fascinating, right? And so the thing for me is what's striking is that many of these women were capable, even excelling, yet internalized doubt. And my curiosity is what does your research suggest about how math identity is constructed? Because I think these experiences help shape
Yeah.
that identity,
Yes.
right?
S- Yeah. So when we start talking about identity, that's basically what my Black women ecosystem talks about is the fact that
Okay.
we're living, we as Black people, we are not going to have what Brofenbrenner would call the normal lifetime. We are, because of this country and the positioning of Black people
Mm-hmm.
historically,
Mm-hmm.
we are always going to be sort of grappling with the different systems, the micro, the macro, the meso. Yet what it said about what my research has said about these systems is that when these particular women found people who created, I call it this uh almost like the Black woman's ecosystem is like an incubator.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It it allowed them this sort of protection, this covering and safety net where they were allowed to, number one, be who they are, and
Right.
number 2, excel in the actual content. Now, the young lady who um, was placed in this math class that was below where she should have been,
Right.
that protection came from her mother because her mother fought the school system until she got her placed where she needed to be.
Wow.
Right?
Mm.
So, um, but the thing about it is that all of them, because of their experiences, realize that when I become a teacher, there's certain things that I'm going to do so that the kids don't have to experience what I experience. And
And
Mhm, go ahead, you were gonna say
yeah,
something.
no, no, because what my mind is like racing, right? So identity is socially mediated, right? With respect to this, teachers' words matter, placement decisions matter, representation matters. These are elements that I think instructional leaders, by and large, um, have to figure out how to make sure that we are not the ones at the root of
Yeah,
cutting the
so let me
limb, so to speak, of
yeah,
scholars
so
who are progressing and excelling.
yeah, so let me tell you where we're struggling with the systems, right?
Okay.
Because there's a larger system out there that's used to already position you and give you an identity, and that is standardized testing, right?
Of course. Of
So
course. Of
so
course.
we have these instructional and institutional, I call them technical proficiencies that we have to meet, right? We have to give benchmark assessments. We have to
Time and
give the
again.
state, okay? We're constantly doing this. And what we do is we remove students' names and we replace them with colors. Oh, they're in the red, they're in the yellow, they're in the green, right?
Mm.
So
Mm-hmm.
we are positioned to basically uh, create this process of removing their mathematical ability and
Okay.
their sort of purpose for learning and
Mm.
about learning, because we start talking about them as if they are just the color on the screen versus not thinking about that's a one time a year
It's a one time,
test.
right? But that it has such a huge impact on the scholar's academic
Hmm.
life, right? And so when we talk systemically, that is part of the challenge. The other piece is that the structure of the landscape of education doesn't necessarily afford that much of a wiggle room for for you to kind of
Mm.
create
Mm.
that shelter for those scholars who really need it. And this is where leadership comes into the equation. Um,
Okay, so let me tell you how I see these black women teachers being leaders on their own,
okay,
and
talk to us.
not waiting for somebody to tell them what they can and can't do.
Good, good.
One of the points that I make in my findings is that they were all instructional disruptors, right? And
Nice. I like that.
I I mean, what I mean by instructional disruptors is that they recognize when something wasn't in the best interest of the student, and
Hmm.
they didn't care what the pacing guide said or who said the test had to be given. You want to see it, it's on the board. Now, when
Right.
you come in my room, you're going to see it on the board, but don't say a word about what I'm doing because I'm getting results from my students.
So that's old school, right? That's old school.
Well,
That's old school
well,
because that's back in the day type of movement where um the veterans back then knew, yeah, this stuff it ain't for our kids. This is what they need. I'm going to give
mhm,
them what they need so that they too can be successful and be competitive when they step on that stage. So that's old school and that's classic. I want to know though, based on just their movement and their
mhm,
transitioning from loving the content, teacher messaging, kind of, causing them to kind of fall back or step away, and other people either had to advocate for them to be given
mhm,
or be put in the right position. What conditions allowed them to reclaim themselves and to for the reclamation to occur, like in their
mhm,
narrative, you know because we know systemically the positioning is always going to be there because it's
mhm,
intentionally designed to be that way. Part of it is the
mhm,
filtration process or the exclusion process. We
mhm,
pretend we want all of you in, but we really don't, right? Few of us manage to get through the cracks, and that's okay. We'll deal with them when they get here. But what were the
mhm,
conditions that allowed these women to reclaim that passion and love that's leading to them being such disruptors in
mhm.
terms of their practice?
So first, let me also say that particularly because I'm concerned about the identity of students and mathematics. I'm specifically dealing with elementary school teachers who didn't
Mm-hmm.
necessarily consider themselves math teachers until this study, right? And once they started thinking
Mm.
about all the things they do, then they
Right.
started, saying, I never considered myself a math teacher, except for one of them who has 3 degrees in mathematics. And so
Okay.
therefore she knew she was a
Three
math teacher,
degrees.
right?
Look at this.
3 degrees in mathematics. Okay. And this is the one who they tried to put her in the basic skills math class now. She's got three
Wow.
degrees in mathematics. Okay.
Wow.
So the reclamation is practically their movement, what I call in and out, or struggling in and out of these particular mesosystems, and
Mm-hmm.
these systems, micro, meso, macro. um, some of them basically decided that it was something that they were striving to do because somebody was telling them that they couldn't.
They couldn't. Wow.
Okay. Another participant, basically, it was her teacher or professor in her college remedial math course. The way that
Hmm.
she taught math finally made her realize, wait a minute, I can do math.
Right.
Right?
Hmm.
It was the way she said, the first thing that she said, I think that was most important, was the fact that she said this was a classroom. She says, first off, I thought, what's going on here? Because
Mm-hmm.
I walked into this classroom and there's a class full of black folks, and I'm wondering what's happening
Mm.
here that we're all in this
Mm.
class, right? And
Wow.
her statement was, but the professor treated us like we were geniuses
Hmm.
and she respected us.
Okay.
So, um,
Messaging. That's
okay,
that
the
messaging.
messaging, the messaging,
Yeah.
and also me making you feel like you belong versus not belonging, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, the so basically all of them grappled. Another participant, she grappled in a college class because she decided after her first year in college, she kind of left school and did something else. And then when
Mm-hmm.
she came back to school, she was much older. And when I
Okay.
say much older, she was in her early 30s, right?
Okay. Okay.
And her, and I say a lot of this has to do with the fact that she was really an adult. Uh,
She's
she
had life
said that
experiences.
she had life experiences, and she wasn't afraid to challenge systems. So
Mm.
when she's in this particular class and the professor's constantly telling her that she's not doing it right, she had no problem saying to him, well, tell me what I'm doing wrong when I'm doing it the way I know how to do it,
Mm.
and I'm getting the same answer, I'm just not doing it your way. Right?
Ooh.
So the
So,
positioning.
Steph, I gotta stop you there.
Yeah, yeah.
How many math classes have we has had or seen teachers, right, throw a hissy fit because a kid approached the problem from a different perspective, even though the outcome was the same, and
Right,
they are insistent that they do it the way that they showed them how to do it, right?
right,
Because again, this is part of the messaging. Like,
right,
you cannot skin this cat just that way. You have to skin it this way. And
right.
that mentality and that disposition turns scholars
Mhm,
off. And if I'm
mhm.
one of those kids who, I get it, I know how to do it, I'm trying to show you, but if you shutting the kid that we all think is the smartest kid in the class down, Kwame isn't going to try. Kwame isn't even going to let you know that I have a clue about how to even get to that, outcome. And so these
Mhm.
are the things that are so fascinating. How many, if we're looking at K-12, how many of those scholars are really, really willing to challenge the adult and authority in that learning environment?
Right. So, and the thing is, um, you have to be open to allowing that. So this is the same person that I'm telling you said to the professor, "I've got the right answer. I
Mm-hmm.
just didn't do it your way." What, and basically she said, "What does it matter?" Right? So
Mm-hmm.
in her classroom, and
Right.
she's in a second grade classroom. She said, when I realized and heard myself about to say, "No, but you didn't," she said, "Oh, I have to stop because I remember how I felt when that happened to me." And so
mm.
her statements to her students are, you can do it however and whichever way you want. But if Miss Guy asks you to explain it
Critical
and you
aspect right
cannot
there.
explain it, then we have a problem,
That is the
right?
that right there is the essence of learning, because when they can take ownership of their work and be able to explain it to you in a way that it makes sense, you have to give them that opportunity.
Right.
That's that
Right.
ownership. That's where we want scholars
Yes.
to get to. And I think that is so fascinating that these individuals in your study are in that space where they can allow scholars to arrive at the answer based on their thinking process, based on their experiences, based on how they're seeing
Mhm.
the numbers work for them, right? And I think that
Yeah.
is so fantastic. That is so fantastic.
Yeah.
Wow.
I think what else is happening is the fact that they recognize that, for example, this same particular participant basically said, when I had this class last year and I'm 2, 3 months in the curriculum and I'm
Hmm.
looking around the room at their faces and I know they don't understand it. She said, I literally wanted to cry
Deers in the
because
headlights.
what she was trying to do was
Wow.
follow the
The pacing guide.
institutional and instructional technical proficiencies of checking the box and
Mm,
teaching the scripted curriculum the way she's being told that it must be taught. Now, mind you, all of these women are teaching in urban centers.
hmm.
And we and
Hmm.
we know how, if you want the money, we know how the
It's about
money
money.
positions what you
It's
can do.
always about funding. It's always about
Okay?
funding, because if we don't teach it this way and our scholars don't perform well on that standardized assessment,
Right.
we're not going
Right.
to get the funding we need, right?
Right.
And so that is also part of the
Mhm.
calculus into the whole the way the system is structured. But I
Right.
love the fact that reclamation for these ladies is both cognitive and restorative.
Mhm.
I'm
Absolutely.
loving that aspect of it. So let's
Absolutely.
kind of move on to looking at the research and to practice, right? Let's bridge your research to your practice, right?
Mhm.
How has studying these lived experiences shaped your own pedagogy and leadership?
So the funny thing about it is, and I'll make the story very short. Um, when I was in the classroom,
Mm-hmm.
uh, I did not recognize that I was one of these teachers,
Mm,
right? I didn't
mm,
recognize that my parents actually, without ever saying a word, basically vacation was go down south every summer. Who do you
right.
visit? You visit family, you visit their former teachers and listen to stories that their teachers told about their classrooms and about your parents in their
Mm-hmm.
classrooms, right? And I did not realize that when I went into the classroom,
Mm-hmm.
I went into the classroom trying to be and actually functioning and acting as that teacher from the segregated South. My classroom,
Mm,
you are my students.
right.
Your intellectual abilities are based upon what I'm going to do with you. I'm going to help
Mm-hmm.
you think and reason. You're not just going to walk out of here just because you can calculate an answer and get the
Oh,
correct answer. You're
okay.
going to have to
Okay.
think, right? So
Okay.
so that's always been my pedagogy. Now when I became a supervisor,
Mm-hmm.
um trying to make folks like me is difficult, right? Uh,
That's a serious. You're trying to move a mountain. You talk about
y
paradigm
right,
shifts, right?
right, right, right.
The
But
dynamics of
I never stopped believing that there are people out there who
oh,
believed enough in the
absolutely.
kids that they were doing that, even though sometimes I may not have seen it. Because,
Mm.
okay, so let's talk about the systems. Our teaching and our teachers are tied to so many systems, especially when Christie changed the observation schedule. I mean, observation practices, right? And
Mm-hmm.
now, um, bad observations, lack of student performance, I can basically lose
Let
my
you go.
income,
I can let
right?
you go.
Okay,
Right.
so now let's be realistic. Let's be practical. Let's think about this. Now that I'm a teacher in a classroom, and let's say I'm working in an urban district, and we know how urban districts are positioned, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Um, am I concerned about keeping my paycheck, or am I concerned about your learning? So I'm concerned about making sure that my observations are at least above a 2.65. So if that means I
Hmm.
got to do the dog and pony show,
Which
I'm
a
going to
lot
do
of
the
folks
dog and
tend to
pony
do.
show. Okay. Now I'm
But that's
going
what that
to.
in sports we call that making a career decision, right?
Okay.
Um,
Okay. So
football, you see that running back come in and he's coming full speed ahead. You know
right.
that a collision with this individual will not go well for you. You make a career decision at the point of impact and kind of sidestep it a little bit.
Okay.
And
Okay.
so
So
yes, in that regard,
right.
2.65, or should I really focus on Kwame and making sure that he
Right.
really gets
Right.
this
Right.
piece?
And so now let's talk about positioning in the classroom. I'm looking at everybody based on the color of their scores, not what they may know. Because I ask so many teachers when they want to come to me and say, "Oh, but I have a whole bunch of kids who are in the red." And I
Mhm.
say, "Okay, so tell me what they do know." So you're not taking the time to get to know what they know because you're so focused on the fact that you think you're going to be basically affected by this red score that happens once a year.
But
Okay.
folks are. In some sectors, folks are, right? Because that becomes a point of discussion. And so we
Mm-hmm.
just talked about the fact that all of this is tied to money, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so this isn't something, while it's one of those
Well, let me say this.
tricky spots,
You,
right?
well,
That
let me say
folks are
this. Let
in.
me
They
say
find
this.
themselves.
Let me say this. I once this will probably be another study later on down the road. But I would love to know the number of teachers who've lost tenure behind poor SGP scores and poor observations. I don't think the number is that
No,
great.
that the numbers on that isn't going to be high. I don't see
Right,
that being a high number,
right,
right?
right.
But I don't know
Mhm,
that people think about it from that lens, right? It's not even a
mhm.
matter of the tenure piece, I think, so much
Well,
as, first of all, I don't want to be considered the low performing teacher, right? If folk and I firmly believe we have well intended people in the profession who are truly passionate about making sure that scholars get the best possible education they can get. It's the way the system is structured, the way the
right. And
system is designed. And so when you
so
talk about that historical narrative you gave about who we
right.
are, or how we are supposed to measure up and don't measure up, and oh, they're coming from that school and all of those are all elements associated with the structure that's currently in place,
So
right?
let me say this. Let me go back to the point of being an instructional disruptor. And I'm just going to talk personally about my life, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
I know for a fact. So I don't know whether you've ever attended. There's a conference called Courageous Conversations.
Mhm.
And I don't know whether you ever attended the conference, but the conference deals with the typical what we see in education in
Mhm.
terms of the limiting and the positioning of education and the impact it has on students of color,
Right.
marginalized populations. Okay, and I remember one of the sessions, and I can't remember who the speaker was. It may have been the founder of the organization, but I remember him saying, if you have never been in a position where you are on the verge of losing your job for the sake of doing the work,
Mhm.
then you haven't been doing the work.
Okay.
Right. So
Okay.
I'm going to say that to say, I know for a fact that I've lost several positions, and part of it had to do with me doing the work and not necessarily
And
fitting in the mold that the way folks wanted me to.
and those of us who function in that capacity are often at odds with leadership,
Mhm, mhm, yeah,
or
and
leaders who
so
do not understand or see the
right,
value in how you're coming to the table. and
Yeah,
what you're
and
trying to
so
do at the table, right? I think that's part of it as well.
and so the I guess my point is, and this is where I become, I can't wait till this degree is finished so I retire so I can really be who I want to be.
Well, you can
And
still
so
be who
this
you
is
want to be. Come on
well,
now.
no, not exactly. Nobody's going to pay me to disrupt their district. Uh,
Like, yeah, I'm gonna just
nobody's
pay you so you could come in here and just tear stuff
let's
up.
put it like this.
No.
Let's put it like this. Nobody's going to pay me on payroll to
Mm.
disrupt their district
Oh,
on their
absolutely not.
payroll.
Absolutely
Okay?
not.
Let
Yes.
me say that.
Yes.
Okay.
You know.
But so this is where um I'm doing a lot of thinking these days about
Okay.
especially when we look at what has happened uh, at education with the changing of folks in Washington D.C.
Uh,
Right, their
I got into
beliefs
a whole
about
conversation about this with my guests after you, but yes, go ahead,
okay,
keep going.
well, I'm looking at it from the standpoint of how it's basically putting us back to the era of my parents' schooling, right?
Mm. Mm-hmm.
So what I'm looking at is, so what is it that we do? Because we know what they did then,
Right.
right? They had their own cocoon systems where they were all speaking the language of, and we're going to get these kids over the hump.
Mm-hmm.
And if it means that I got to go to their house, if it means that I have to do this, then that's what I'm doing, right? So there's a couple of things. The community of
Mm-hmm.
black folks has, shifted. We're not the community that we used to be because
Okay.
we're not all
I'm glad you
located.
because I was about to ask a question about can we really go back to that
Okay.
element, right? And that's a
s-
question. It's a question that really needs to be
Well,
explored.
so
But go
so
ahead.
here's the thing, and here's where I think this is where I want to look.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just, again, like I said, I'm just thinking, right? Because um during that era, the focal point rested with the church,
Yes.
right?
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So we still got black churches. Even though I may not live in the neighborhood, I still go to a black church. So I guess my question becomes, do we and should we be thinking about creating these cocoon systems of education? We've
Mm-hmm.
known them as freedom schools. Some of them
Which
still exist,
a
right?
lot of them still exist, right?
Right? But do we need to collectively be thinking about that in a larger capacity for our students? And then, again, I'm thinking
That's
philosophically here,
right, right.
right?
And I think that's a beautiful question. And it's one that really warrants, I think, some exploration because in in the current structure of our society, I don't know that we are still able to pull that everybody together for the purposes of we need to get us, not me, right? Because we have gotten into this individualistic space that we need to
Right,
pull us
right,
together to get
right,
us over the hump. I
right.
think you'll get that in pockets, but at whew, yeah,
Well,
it's the
so
days of old, as you said,
so
back
you
in
know,
your parents' time, right?
mhm.
There was a focal area for it was us against the world, right? It was us against whoever. I don't know that we as a people we are functioning in that space still in this hemisphere in this
Well,
country, right?
here's where I say I
We
think
have pockets.
we
I
are.
wouldn't right.
Yep.
Okay.
But here's where I say we are. I've worked urban suburban now, right?
Okay.
Okay. I'm going to tell you right now. I don't care how much money the folks in the district I worked in when I was suburban. Those same black parents, their kids were excluded from a lot of things. And I would
Mm,
say to them, these folks are coming to me asking for these things. I'm telling you they exist. Why haven't I heard from you?
mm,
Right?
mm.
So
Okay.
just because I might be able to tout I live in a certain location, it doesn't mean that I'm still getting the access,
Right.
right? So
Right.
I think I guess what I'm thinking is, you know how folks are interested in something when they see something's working, and why am I not part of that? Or why don't I have access to that?
Right.
Right? So I think if it starts something as a little microcosm of something and it grows and people start learning about it, then it's something that everybody wants a piece of
Okay.
because I mean, again, I'm thinking philosophically,
No, I hear
philosophically,
you. No, no, no. I'm
because
with you.
it's
I'm with you. Trust me. I think we're, and this is, when we talk about the landscape of education, this is one of those things that we need to really begin the process of looking at with intentionality, because the decisions being made at the top are intentionally being made to cut us out, to exclude us. When you talk about we
and
can't, our history is irrelevant and it can't be taught. And if it is going to be taught, right, we
mhm,
attaching funding to it. And you guys go ahead and do it that way. You're gonna lose your funding. If I see these
mhm,
books, right? So all of these elements, again, when we talk about the educational landscape, I think this is one of the dynamics that's at play that really warrants us getting serious and sit and going into a little huddle to kind of figure out how we are going to position ourselves
mhm,
to be able to get done what needs to be done for our scholars and for our respective communities, so that we
mhm,
too thrive despite what the folks are trying to
mhm,
pull, right? And so
mhm, mhm,
um you know just kind of looking at things, the disrupting deficit thinking, repositions scholars as intellectual contributors. I think these are elements that we need to definitely begin to kind of shift our attention to doing with
mhm.
intentionality to ensure that, we are ready to deal with whatever else is coming down the pipe. Let
Right.
me move us along in terms of looking at leadership implications as it pertains to your study. As
Mhm.
someone who has supervised up to 150 educators and now serve in a district leadership capacity, what should administrators understand about the findings in your research?
I think the biggest thing is that these women didn't look for guidance. Basically they did decision making and showed that they were capable of making good decisions and did not necessarily need to be led. Right now, I'm not
Okay,
saying that we don't need to have these think tanks, but I think the bigger thing is that leaders need to recognize that sometimes leadership doesn't always have to come from the top or out of your office or through your email,
absolutely,
right?
absolutely.
And what I looked at is they took it upon themselves to be transformational leaders. They took it upon themselves to make their classrooms these spaces where kids could see themselves, where kids could feel free, where
Mm-hmm.
kids could express themselves, where kids felt safe making mistakes.
Mm.
And knowing that just because they made the mistake, it didn't mean it was the end of the road for them in terms
Absolutely.
of
Okay.
performance, right?
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
I think for leadership, it's number one, you have to, we understand, and I understand because I've worked with lots of principals. Everybody's held to the technical proficiencies, especially
Mm-hmm.
as the leader of the building, especially when you're working in an urban center,
Yep.
right?
Hmm.
And your scores overall may not be a certain threshold. You're being hounded all year about what you're going to do to change the scores, right? Not
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
not what are you going to do to improve your teacher's pedagogy, which should change the scores, right? We focus strictly on the scores, and then what happens is it's like it's this is the way I see it. We're focusing on the scores. Well, when we talk about the scores, who are we talking about? We're talking about the students. Well, when we're talking about the students, who are we talking about? Well, the
The
teachers,
teacher.
but the teachers are not necessarily considering themselves responsible because they're going to come up with the excuses that put the responsibility back on the student.
Right.
So
Right.
it's this
That vicious
back
cycle.
and forth,
That
right?
vicious cycle.
Versus
Yeah.
and so for leadership, that means leadership has a stop when it gets to that teacher, and that teacher says, "Well, that student comes from a single parent household. So what? The student's
Mm-hmm.
with you Monday through Friday from
Yep.
this time to this time. What are you going to do?" Because what has happened is we continue to take this, well, and okay, well, let's talk about the students. Well, what is it that we need to do? Well, now let's throw an intervention program together. But we go to that classroom every day, and that teacher is still doing the same thing that she's done. And we're expecting that the intervention program is going to change the learning for the
So,
student.
so along those lines, right? When you start thinking in terms of equity, conversations must include math identity, right? Data dis-
Absolutely.
data disaggregation must go beyond achievement and include access. We want to
Absolutely.
talk about teacher preparation must also address biases in math spaces, right? All of these elements that we're kind of observation should focus on discourse and affirmation. All of these elements have to
Yes.
kind of be part of the conversation
Yes.
so
Yes.
that when we're holding somebody accountable for an expectation, we know that we've positioned them and we've given them the tools to effectively do what's needed, what needs to be done with
Yeah.
fidelity, I would say, to ensure
Hmm.
that that scholar that sits before them is being met where he or she is in order to move them, in order for them to thrive. The
Yeah.
thing that I'm loving is the fact that you're saying most the participants of your study are primarily elementary school level teachers, which is awesome. The challenge
I
you always have is that,
specifically
right?
wanted to focus elementary, yes.
Right. The challenge you have is these dynamic practitioners are creating these safe spaces for scholars to make mistakes, and that's okay, and you'll figure it out, and I'm going to work with you, and I'm going to support you, and I'm going to give you the tools you need to
Mhm.
be able to do well, right?
Yep.
The challenge that always presents itself is that when they leave that space,
Mhm.
the next practitioner will they provide that same level of
So
safe
let me
space,
tell you a
right? And so
story.
this is the continuity element is becoming critical,
Okay.
and this is one of
So
the things that we need to really address as well.
s so let me tell you a story, and you mentioned it about having to help teachers to identify their own biases, right?
Hmm.
One of the participants hearing one of the teachers talking down about a student that she had had previously.
Mm,
There was an assessment that the student had to take, and it wasn't even in mathematics, it was in another subject.
okay.
But she insisted, please let me be the proctor for this
Mm,
particular student because she knew, having had the student, she knew what the student was capable of. She
okay.
proctored the exam, and the exam had to be recorded. So everything that he was doing was on record.
Okay.
She showed the results to his current teacher, and she
Mm-hmm.
was taken aback. And her only statement to the teacher who proctored the exam, my study participant, was,
Uh-huh.
he never speaks in class.
Mm.
And so, therefore, there was an immediate, you need to be
Assumption.
self reflecting. How is it that this woman who had this student 2 years ago, 2 years ago,
Mm,
can sit down with him and he gave her everything she needed? And when she showed that teacher, oh, she said he knew a lot. The teacher
mm.
just didn't know what he knew because evidently, whatever her classroom culture is, he did not feel comfortable about. Like her, she's the one who silenced herself in mathematics when she felt the teacher was not helping her and harmful to her. She just shut down.
So here we go with that R word relationship.
Yeah, yeah, but
Relationship.
And
because
relationship beyond, "Oh, I know that he has a brother or sister he likes."
oh,
It's beyond that.
absolutely,
Their
absolutely, it
relationships
has
are
to be
well
beyond that.
beyond that.
It has to be
Yes,
beyond that because if it's not, you're not getting much out of this kid or a lot of these
absolutely,
scholars, right? So
absolutely.
you heard teachers say, "Oh, you don't do this when you're in my class. You go over there and you behave yourself and you do what you're supposed." There's a reason behind that. There's a
Mhm,
reason why I take academic risks when I'm with so and so. Why? Because
mhm,
I'm not going to
mhm.
be belittled. I'm not
Ooh,
going to be judged. I'm not going to be
yeah,
made to feel like I don't
yeah.
belong or that I'm stupid. So all of these
Listen,
elements come
I can't
into the
wait.
equation.
I can't wait till my dissertation's published because one of my participants, her
Hmm.
end of class conversation with her students was, "And when you walk out of here, when
Hmm.
you walk," meaning her class, "when
Right.
you walking down the hall, you are not to become anybody's dinner time conversation."
Wow. I like that. I like that. I like
Right?
that.
And that she was like, "You are a reflection of me,
But you know
and
what's
so when you
fascinating?
leave here." Yeah.
This is the type of messaging scholars of old used to get from practitioners, right? When teachers were vested in the well-being and development and growth of scholars, right? Because we were being marginalized, we were being put aside. And so in those classroom, one classroom with multi grades, right? These were the types of messages that a lot of scholars used to get, right?
Mhm,
And
mhm,
you can still find it, but they are few and far between.
mhm.
You can still
And so
find it, but they're few and far between.
so let's talk about where that shift came in. That
Hmm.
shift came in with okay, macro level. Macro level, seriously. Where the shift came in was, and you have to read Nolloway Rooks,
Okay.
the privatization of education, right? She talks about, and I can't remember the woman who actually started the concept of charter schools, but it was a black woman.
Okay.
Um, and how that was kind of hijacked to become this kind of privatized, commercialized, capitalistic system where,
Hmm.
oh, I now realize that I can grab public money if I do this. And
Right.
so I start trying to sell, I'm offering you a better education over here. Okay.
Hmm.
By siphoning off that money from public schools, siphoning off students from public schools,
And you do
right?
know that they returned them. They used to return
Absolutely,
them. They used to
and
return
they
them
still
after the
do.
15th of October.
Exactly, exactly. After the 15th
But
of October, so
that's
you can
my
complete
that's
so
cease
you
and
can keep the
desist now.
money.
But they used to turn them back, those jokers back
Oh,
in.
but
Like, oh,
they're still doing it.
I'm sure
They're
they
still
are.
doing
I'm
it.
sure they are.
I
We'll take the good ones, but the ones that are
not even
challenged,
listen,
ship them back.
I I was at a school this week, and 3 new students came from a charter school, and it's
Mm.
March. It's March,
Hey, listen, it ain't matter what
okay?
time of year. Once
Yeah,
they become a bit much, we're sending them back to
yeah,
you. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
And
yeah.
so let's talk about where that happened. Well, there's where that began because when we started doing that, and when the charter school system and the movement started happening, then that's when the idea of, well, if you can show us that you're performing test
Mm,
wise, then hey, maybe we don't have to have these charter schools. But right now, as it goes, you aren't performing, so the charter schools are set up to perform better than you, but when they're getting the same results,
right,
then now what's your
right,
argument? Right
right.
now, what's your
Because very,
argument? So
very few of them are actually outperforming the
right,
public schools.
I
Very
I
few.
say to I say to everybody, because I've worked in 2 charter schools, and I've predominantly worked urban center,
Hmm.
public school,
Okay.
and suburb for 4 years, right? And I say to everybody when they talk about charter school, I said, "You know that story that folks tell you that you take yourself wherever you go?"
Mm.
Okay, so now what makes you think when I'm taking myself over to the charter school, that same student over to the charter school, What
They don't.
makes you think that you are going to perform a miracle in a year? And I'm not saying that it's not possible, but I've worked in the charter school and I know what you do. You do drill kill,
Mm-hmm.
right? You create robots because they have to answer the question a certain way. You have all these formulas
Critical
that
thinking is
okay is slim.
marginalized.
Right, right, I
Marginalized.
right, and there are times in which they're in the school and I'm not speaking of all charter schools, but I'm
Okay.
giving my opinion of where
Your
I have
perspective
worked.
based
Yes,
on your
where I have
experience.
worked and what I have seen. Now, I'm sure, because folks are gonna listen to this and say, "Oh, I run a charter school and we do this."
Oh no, they
I
can
say,
listen. We welcome the conversation because
"Yeah,
that's what we say. Transformation begins with conversations, right? So
this is true.
yes,
This is true."
let's get that conversation going.
Right.
And
I say this just like I say to teachers in schools. Okay, great. Your test scores were great, but your test scores alone don't pull the school out
mm-mm,
of
status or
position.
wherever we
Right.
are, right?
So, okay, great. Your charter school is great, but just because your charter school is great, it doesn't change the positioning of every black child in the United States.
No doubt, no
And
doubt.
what we're trying to do, what at least what I want to focus on is I don't care where you looked across the South.
Hmm.
Black folks were performing. Black folks were doing things. They were educated. They were engineers. They were doctors. They were lawyers. And now we act like we can't teach black kids or kids of color. And I'm
Well,
wondering,
again, it's
I
always
know
about the
the
narrative,
answer, but
though.
I'm wondering how we shift the narrative.
And that's the challenge. That's the challenge. But part of how we shift the challenge, the narrative. So let me ask you this: as an adjunct professor, how are you using your research
Mm.
to influence pre-service practitioners?
Yeah. So at the current moment, I'm going to be quite frank and say I'm not.
Mm,
Um, And here's why, because I was, advised by the university right now that I needed to focus on teaching the courses that I have and
mm,
keeping my set work separate until, right?
until okay,
But I will say this. Um, the classes that I had before this last year were basically classes on assessment for learning. In other words, it was trying to help teachers understand the true process and reason for assessment
okay,
beyond what we think assessment is, standardized
okay.
testing. So
Mm-hmm,
that was
mm-hmm.
the course that I had. But this past year, I was given a course called Socially Just and Culturally Responsive Pedagogy. And I was basically given the course because
I'm
my
curious about that one. Go ahead.
my
I'm listening.
professors knew what my study was about, and they said,
Mm,
this is the course that you need to have." So they gave me
really?
that course. So,
Okay.
I will say that I basically had my class before you want to come in here. Now mind you, these are people who are want to be teachers, so they have not
Okay.
taught
Okay.
these. Okay, they're basically in a master's of education. No, actually no, they either have a master's or they've taken a bunch of courses that may not lead them to, like, let's say, supervision or administration. So this is a
Okay.
master's that will give them it's a master's program that will give them a leadership degree, so that if they want to pursue supervision,
Okay.
principalship,
Okay.
whatever else they can.
Okay.
So
Okay.
this is only the second year that this course has existed, and they brought me on. I did not teach the first year. They brought me
Okay.
on the second year to work with another professor. And I will say that I grounded the beginning of my class and them
Mhm.
understanding how much black folks focused on education and being educated. So when you
Okay.
want to start talking about these kids don't want to be educated, that's not true,
That's a lie.
because
That's an
you
emphatic
you
lie.
historically have seen, you've read about why black folks were interested in being educated and what they felt it meant to them as a race. So
Mhm.
let's not say that black folks don't want to be educated or kids of color don't want to be educated. Now we have to start looking at the systems because I showed you how once slavery ended and reconstruction started, they were establishing schools all over the place, in church
Absolutely.
basements and some everywhere.
Absolutely.
Okay. So
How do you
you
think those
can't
HBCUs came about?
so you can't stay in that lane.
Right.
You now have to start talking about what existed when they did and what's not present now. So now it's a totally different conversation,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
And so we kind of went along that line of thinking. Well, at least I did in terms of what I had the students doing in the
Hmm.
course. On
Okay.
top of having them do readings about culture responsive pedagogy, uh, readings
And that's a
about
critical piece. That
yeah,
cultural responsiveness is a critical piece. So
yeah.
I want to kind of bring us to a close because I think we are approaching that bewitching hour
Okay.
for us. Uh, Practical application from your research. If educators wanted to apply insights from your doctoral work tomorrow,
Mhm.
what
Mhm.
are three immediate shifts you will point them to?
Yeah. So part of my implications actually for this research is identifying how we redesign teacher education courses
Okay,
to
talk to us.
uh, to basically study the practices of Black women in terms
Mm.
of uh, what they do, how they do it, how we actually create uh, classrooms of care. Not just say we have relationship because I know the kid likes soccer, but what does it actually mean to establish a classroom of care and
Hmm.
looking at what are those things that those women or the women in this study did that actually s- basically spoke to care that we may not have necessarily considered care. So let me say this, like one of the things that I classified under instructional care was the fact that they all normalize making mistakes in the classroom,
Which is a
right?
huge piece. That's huge.
Okay. So that was a caring aspect because they knew if I shut the kid down, I'm getting nothing out of him, right?
Especially at that tender age, taking that academic risk only to be embarrassed or shut down. Some of those scholars close and close
Right.
for a long
Right.
period of time. Okay.
An-
Okay.
another
What would be
another
another
thing I
shift?
Yeah, another thing that I talked about was um, the per the researcher's name is Oshito, I believe, or Ohito, and her statement was that Black women's lives are a textbook, and we're willing to let you
Is it
learn.
ever?
Right? Okay? We're willing to let you learn. But I added to that statement, but not to the extent that you're going to cause harm to me in the process of your learning.
Okay.
Okay?
Okay.
So the other thing is teachers have to be reflective, and I'm taking this down to the ground level. Teachers have to start being reflective about their own pedagogy. So, one of my implications was that, teachers need to be reflective about identifying where they might be causing instructional harm and being
Hmm.
honest and open with themselves about that. But then
Mm.
when you come to that realization that that's what you have been doing, not trying to think that you can solve this on your own, but possibly speaking to someone who actually has understands what that looks like because they've experienced it,
Right.
and also that person being open enough to dialogue with you to have a conversation about, and this is what I wish I had that I did not.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
Or you are talking to these teachers who are saying, and this is what happened to me. And because this happened to me, this is what I'm doing because I want to make sure it's never going to happen to another child in my classroom. right? So that was one of the other things that I talked about. Because I'm looking at all the different systems. I even talk about what needs to happen at a higher level, in terms of government,
Right,
Department of
right, right.
Education, so
Okay.
forth and so on. But at the micro level, it's even before the the school leadership is involved, I place onus on the teacher because you have control of that classroom, because that person that sits in that office that runs the building is not in your classroom every
And don't
day.
s- and doesn't see the kid with the same lens that you do. So,
Exactly.
and that's
Yeah.
part of the reason why that reflective component is
Mhm.
critically important for all practitioners across the spectrum, including leaders as well. But
Right, right.
let's bring this to a close here. What
Okay.
do you hope your research contributes to the field of mathematics education?
Hmm. My hope is that it starts shifting. Okay, here's the thing. My number one, I hope that it starts giving voice to Black women teachers who are doing the work, especially
Okay.
work like this, right? That's number one.
Okay.
Because, like I said, I want to expand this. I mean, I found 5 teachers who are doing this. I know there have to be more. Number
I'm
two,
sure there are.
I want folks to understand that it's not, if this is good for Black kids, then it's going to be good for all kids, right? These
Yes.
practices are going to be good for all kids. And there are studies out there already that show you got a Black teacher, it's good for Black kids, but it's also good for all kids, right?
Right.
So these
Right.
practices are good for all kids. The second thing, well, third thing is that I want this research, to be quite honest with you, what I really would love, and I've been thinking about this for years, I actually want a, not necessarily a lab school, but I would love
Hmm.
to have a program where I am bringing in teachers who are doing this work,
Mm-hmm.
that I can offer them the opportunity to teach someone else. So it's almost like, you come to a summer camp as an
Like
educator
a boot
because you're
camp.
interested in changing your pedagogy. And you basically will experience this not by watching, but you are going to be the student in the classroom while the
Doing.
teacher actually is
Hmm.
doing those things. And you're then going to have to basically think about, what did you see, because we're not going to tell
Mm.
you.
Mm-hmm.
What did you see
Okay.
that compares to what you do or don't do, and then let's talk about what that means
So
compared
so
to
I
the
think I have a name for
responses.
that. The summer lab. The summer lab. Go in the
You
lab
know?
and
Yeah,
experience the dynamics of the lab, and then
yeah, yeah,
reflect before you walk into your personal school lab and make it do what it
yeah,
do.
yeah, yeah, yep.
Miss
So, yeah.
Stephenie Tidwell. Great
Yeah,
catching up to you and great
you too,
catching
you
you
too.
and being able to bring you at to the desk to share your insights, your research, and your lived experience as well with our audience. These game changers, I call them game changers for a reason because I know that each time each of them steps into the classroom space, their actions has a full impact on the scholar
Yeah,
and is going to change who that scholar is likely to become down the line. So I thank
very
you
true.
so much for lending your voice to the
Thank you for having
educational
me.
landscape. And we will see you soon, Dr. Tidwell.
Yeah,
All
now to
right.
get back to the edits, now to get back to the
Go
edits.
handle your edits and I will close this out.
All right, I
Thank you so
appreciate it.
much. I
Thanks so much.
appreciate you. All right.
Okay, take care.
You too.
Alrighty, bye-bye.
Bye bye. Research gives language to lived experience, and when scholarship meets story, transformation becomes possible. Stephenie Tidwell, thank you for bringing both your practice and your research to the desk. To our listeners, game changers, may we teach mathematics in ways that affirm identity, restores love, and liberate possibilities. Until our next gathering at the desk, I bid you well. Thank you.